creating an application with an MSI. Well, this is the easier one, so let's start with easy. So we're going to right-click on Applications and Create Application. We're going to look out to the UNC path where the MSI is located. Well, it looks like it's done, but it's not quite done. We have a little bit more to do. You can add in a publisher or versions. The nice thing about an MSI is it automatically pulls in the silent install command line for you. It's working really hard, by the way. Hey, the magic pause button made this happen a lot faster for you guys. Alright, so we created an application, but now we need to go and actually edit it. So I'm going to right click on, I can't believe it's Java 8 Update 92 already, and look at the properties. Alright, I like to put the date published just because that gives me a reference to when I did this app. And I always check this box to allow it to be installed from a task sequence without being deployed. That means if you create this application, you don't deploy it to a collection just for in the Software Center. You can actually put it in a task sequence and have it be deployable. The application catalog. I'm all about making things pretty. So down here where the icon is, I'm going to browse out. I'm going to go to the same UNC path I just used. They can pull the icon file from down here. If you look, it's got a DLL, XE, JPEG, icon file, or a PNG. And sometimes you'll even have multiple icons to pick from depending on what it pulls. You have the option to display it as a featured app and highlight it in the company portal. The References tab, this is if if you're superseding a previous version of this application. The deployment types, the nice thing about having an MSI is it creates this for you, but we're still going to edit and dive a little deeper. The Content tab is where the source files are located, whether or not you want to allow fallback source for content. If you need to edit the command line, sometimes it doesn't pull it in perfectly. Sometimes you need to put in an extra like /no restart or SQVN or whatever the switches are. You can also browse out, grab your MSI yet again, and this allows it to automatically make changes for you based on changes in the file. The detection method, the MSI pulls in the detection method of the installer code automatically. If this isn't correct, you can always change it to a file system or a registry key, but generally if you have an MSI, what it pulls in works. The user experience, it defaults to system and whether or not a user's logged on and how to run it. To me, this is the big one you want to look at. This is how long it's going to run before it fails. So if you have this in a task sequence, it's going to try by default for 2 hours to install the application before it moves on to the next step. Plus, this is what it shows in the Software Center for the estimated time remaining. If there's requirements, if it has to be a certain operating system version, 32-bit, 64-bit, if you need certain amounts of memory, you can specify it here. And dependencies, if you have like a document camera that requires Adobe Air, you could package Adobe Air first and then make it be a dependency and have it self-install for you. Alright, so now we actually created the application. We're going to deploy this. I'm going to browse out, and we are going to deploy this to all users, which there's not many in my little domain here. The nice thing about it is it's going to automatically distribute the content for us. We're going to add in the distribution point. I'm going to make it available, but just to show you what it looks like, I'm going to require administrator approval. So this is really handy if you have licensed software and you want to make it available, but you don't want just anybody to install it. You want to control who's got it out there. You can schedule to make it available. If you want to make it so it's not available till next Monday, you can do it. Display in Software Center and show all notifications. I'd like to show that it's only available and only for restart, so that way people don't get unnecessary notifications. This is only if you have Apps Manager in your environment for alerts. We're going to confirm the settings, especially when you're doing a deployment. You want to make sure you know where you're deploying it to. That there's 6 members in my group and I'm only making it available. It's not a required deployment. Alright, so we successfully created the application. Now we need to wait a minute for it to distribute the content, so I'm going to pause you and get ready on the other side. So I bounced over to my Windows 7 box, and I'm a user obviously in that collection, and we have Java 8 Update 92 available, and notice the pretty icon. This is the difference between packages and task sequences and pretty applications. So I want Java. I don't know why, but I want the latest Java. But I have to request approval for Java? Why do I have to request approval? Okay, so it took me over to my application catalog. I have Java 8 Update 92, and I can request it. But I'm the administrator. Why do I need to request this? Let's say because I need to play Minecraft, right? That's legitimate. So I'm going to submit that request. So let's bounce back to my console and let's look for approval requests. Sorry about that. I got a cat meowing at me while I'm trying to record this for you. Alright, so on this I can look and say, do I want to approve it? Let's see, the status requested. Who's the user? Jody Gaver. What does she want? Well, I guess I will approve it, but only this time. Oh, there it is. Because I need to play Minecraft, I think she's doing this for her kid. Approvers comments. I'll say just this once. Okay, it's been approved, so let me go back to the other box, and we can go back to Software Center. Now this time when I click on Java, I don't have to request approval anymore. I have an install button. So Java installed. And the nice thing about an application pulled from an MSI is you also have this uninstall button. So if I went, oops, I didn't really actually need that, I can uninstall that without administrator rights. Creating an application if you do not have an MSI file. Well, Java by default gives you an executable, so let's work with that. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to create an application, but I am going to manually specify the application information. And in this, we have to actually type it out. 8 update, let's go doesn't matter, because it's going to change probably by the time I present this in a few days. Date published, we're going to allow it to be installed. And I still want the pretty icon. Any of you who work with me very often, you're just going to know you need to do the pretty icon. Deployment types. Before it created one for us, we're going to go ahead and add one. We're going to manually specify the information. And we have to name it. So we'll go fancy and call it like install Java. The content location is the UNC path to the source files. By default, allows you to share content with other clients on the same subnet. If you know your environment, you'll know whether or not this is a good idea. The installation program, if you browse out, it's only going to show you the MSIs. So I'm going to come back here to my UNC path, and I'm going to grab the actual name of the file. When you had an MSI, it pulled in the command line and switches for you. Not here, so you have to actually specify the file and the switches. And with a little trial and error and some Googling and binging, you can figure out that this is just /s. Not /S, but /small s. And also, if you know the uninstall string, you can put it there, but for demo purposes, I'm going to blow by this today. Configure rules. Before it added a nice rule for you with the MSI, this time we are going to have to add one manually. So in the previous recording I did with creating the application from the MSI, it pulled in the Windows installer code. Awesome. Here we don't have that. So we can go out and we can use the file system. We can browse out, and if it's not installed on the local computer you're working on, you can actually connect to a different computer, browse out to the path, and grab the actual file. For this one, because it's my demo machine and I do snapshots and blow it away and start over regularly, I have Java on my regular machine here. So let's go out, and I want to say it's, alright, not program files. It must be x86. There's Java, the latest version. Let's go in the bin. And you have all these file names. So we'll grab the java.exe. And you can say that this file must exist. If you were doing newer ones, you could even say, look, hey, it's got to be, newer than this date modified. We're going to install this for a system, whether or not a user's logged in. Now, if you remember, a lot of this was done for you by default from the MSI. But on the other hand, walking through this, you have full control and you know what's going on. We're going to set that a maximum allowed runtime to make sure it doesn't keep our task sequence hung up for a couple hours. And I'm not going to add any requirements at this time. No software dependencies for Java yet. Alright, so we just created an application, sorry, wrong click, from an executable, not an MSI, manually setting everything. You can use command lines in this, so if you need to add a reg key or run a batch file or a CMD file, any VBS, PowerShell script, you can do it in an application manually like that. Deploying applications has become a huge part of the help desk and IT responsibilities. As we know, things change very, very quickly now. Vulnerabilities come out, and we always get that, hey, you need to update Flash Player for everybody yesterday. SCCM allows you to package that up quickly. You can come in, whether it's a package or application, you can right-click on it, deploy. You can pick the collection you want to deploy to. For those of you who aren't familiar with collections, they're kind of like AD organizational units. It's just ways to manage and group devices or users. And I'm going to send that out there to everybody right now because it's a huge vulnerability. If you hadn't distributed the content, it will for you. We'll get into that more later. You can either make it available, which is in the Software Center for self-service, or if you need to force that update out, you could say required, and it will do exactly that. It will go out to everybody as soon as possible. You can pre-deploy it to the user's primary device, send wake-up packets. If you have metered connections, it allows for that. You can say do it right now. You can schedule it to be later. Like, let's say you want to schedule the deployment for 5 o'clock on a Friday when you're going to be gone and you're taking vacation on Monday. You can say whether you want it to be in Software Center to show all notifications or only to show for restarts or hide everything. If you have Operations Manager in your environment, you can set alerts for that. You confirm your settings and make sure that you are actually wanting to send out Flash Player to all your desktops and servers. you would hit next, and then it would finish your deployment. Now I can show you, if you just wanted to make it available in Software Center, what that would look like for the end user. So they would have the Software Center. A lot of people put shortcuts on the desktops, and Flash Player is in there. It's really pretty in the new, this is the 1602, the latest edition. And they can just go install, and they can get it updated themselves. Okay, so the Flash Player installed. Now the cool thing about this model is it uses different detection methods to make sure it actually installed, so it won't needlessly reinstall. So if you have some people that deploy or go ahead and install it from the Software Center, if you push out a required update, it won't reinstall if it already exists. So going back here, when you get those calls about, oh, we have to deploy the software, it can be software, it can be an MSI, an executable, a reg key, anything from a command line, anything you can script, so a batch file, a .cmd file, just about anything you can dream up, SCCM can deploy it and deploy it in a hurry for you. The HP Client Integration Kit works awesome with SCCM for importing drivers for WinPE and driver packs, and I'm going to show you quickly how to do it. Once you have it installed, you can right-click on Driver Packages. We're going to create and import client driver packs. We select the operating system. We're going to go Windows 10 64-bit. And the product name, there's a whole huge list. I'm just going to grab the first thing that comes up here. Next. It gives us the option to create a driver package, or we can import drivers only. We'll call this HP Demo. I'm going to grab my distribution point, and this is the path where we're going to save it. I'll be right back so I don't have to bore you with this part. And bam, that was quick. This does have to be a shared out UNC path to work. And we click the import button, and I drag and drop so you can see what's going on. And this process to download and extract all the drivers and build the package can take anywhere from 20 minutes to, I've seen, just over an hour, depending on the environment and how big the package is. Hey, magic! Successfully create the driver pack. Successfully create the driver pack. I'm not thinking this was an English-speaking person that wrote this. So when it creates this driver package, it puts it in a subfolder under driver packages, HP Client Driver Packages. And there it is, and you can see it's putting it up on the distribution point for me. That is slick. Endpoint protection in SCCM. Endpoint handles your antivirus and malware all in one system. It's a really set it and forget it system. You create an automatic deployment rule under the software library. In order to have this work, you have to have the software update point rule installed and WSYS. So you create an automatic deployment rule. There's a little wizard that walks you through how to set it up. But this is telling SCCM when to go out and get endpoint definitions and where to send them out to update them. So you can see here, mine just ran 5.3.832. Yes, this is just a couple days ago. So let's bounce over to the client side and take a look at what this looks like. So on their end, they have this little icon down in the bottom there, and they can open this up. You as the administrator in the client settings control how much they have the ability to change here. Most environments, we don't want to give them too much access because they're just going to play with things. So as you can see, mine's only got definitions from just a couple days ago. I have mine set in my environment to only run once a week because this is my home internet and my son gets grumpy when I take up all the bandwidth. So if we go back and under monitoring, that dashboard I had up at the beginning here, this will show you everything that's going on in your environment. And if you have endpoint deployed to different collections, you can sort by those collections. It'll show you if there's any malware found. If there is malware found, you can go a little deeper here and it will actually list all the malware and, what it did to remediate them. This health attestation is new to 1602. This allows you to show that devices are compliant, non-compliant, error, unknown states. And again, this is, if I didn't mention it, this is only Windows 10. So it goes in even deeper and shows like the top missing ones, non-compliant devices by client type. I don't have any Windows 10 devices reporting into my system yet, so this will be updating shortly. So why would you want to use Endpoint? Because it's easy to maintain. And it works. I have numerous clients out there, law firms, manufacturing facilities, and among education, using Endpoint in their environment, even for their servers, and it's worked beautifully. They get hit no less than anybody else with things like ransomware. SCCM offers some cool help desk / built-in technician tools. You can look up a device, right-click on it, go to the Start button, and the most used one is remote control. If your client settings are set up properly, it will remote you right in. Without prompting the end user, it'll show the name of the technician who's remoted in, and you have full control of their computer. And you can just hit the X button to close the session. The next thing it'll show you is you can right-click, Start, and Resource Explorer. Help desk people get calls of, oh, my computer's being slow or whatever, and you can look up and see, oh, they actually have X amount of memory in the system, or look up what their computer is and say, okay, yes, it actually is an older computer, and let's talk about replacing or upgrading it. We can right-click Start and do remote assistance. That's the same thing as remote control, but it actually prompts on the other end. Every now and then you have somebody that doesn't want you just popping into their computer. And you also have the remote desktop client available. The package model. Isn't that the old way of doing things? Well, technically it's the legacy way, but it still has its place in time. Especially if you want something to reoccur over and over again, use a package. You can't do that with an application. Or if you just have something really simple, like a script, a batch file, just throw it in a package and send it out. Or if you're having trouble testing an application, it's not working, throw it in a package and test it again. So we're going to create a package from definition. We're going to browse out. I would normally put my UNC path up here, but I've already been here, so I'm going to grab my MSI. The nice thing about having an MSI is it pulls a lot of this information and sets a lot of things for you. Okay, we created a package. So now I'm going to look at the program on that package. I'm sorry if it's off the screen a little there, but we have per system unattended is the one I'm interested in. And on the the requirements tab, I want to change that maximum allowed runtime to 15 minutes. Java in its worst case shouldn't run more than 15 minutes. And I'm going to right click on that and we're going to distribute the content. And done. And now just like an application, you can right click and deploy. So they both have their place and time, but I highly consider trying to do packages, especially when doing testing or anything you want reoccurring. Reporting. This is a huge, huge aspect of SCCM. Last I knew, before these latest versions were released, we had over 400 reports available just built into SCCM. Whether you need to know how much memory is in all your computers out there, the software, anything to do with hardware, drivers. A huge one people like is if you have the asset intelligence role, you can actually import a Microsoft license into SCCM and then run these reconciliation reports against it. So if you need to true up at the end of the year, SCCM can do that for you. I created just a generic license file and imported since I don't have a Microsoft one, but I can show you what it looks like to run a report. So you click Run on the report, you pick the collection you want to run it against, hit View Report, and this will list all the licenses that I'd imported, the quantity, if it found any, and the difference. You also don't have to have the SCCM console installed to view reports. You can come right to this main page and give this URL to your managers and whoever needs access to it. When they come in here, they're going to have the default folder, and then all the reports are available in here for them to run. So when in doubt with reporting, just Google it, Bing it, and say, hey, is there a report for this in the SCCM? Because the odds are pretty good it is. The biggest part you'll have difficulty in is finding which category and which is the actual report you need. Right-click tools. Now these are all third-party add-ins, and there's quite a few people out there that make them, but they are very, very, very useful. For those of you who already have SCCM, you know what it's like to have to log on to the client machine and control panel and go to config manager and run the different actions, the different cycles that you need to trigger the policies pushing out. Here you can right-click on the machine you want. You can go down to the right-click tools that you have, and we have all sorts of things available. Under client actions, you can force the application deployment cycle if it's an app you deployed. Discovery data, file collection, hardware inventory. The top ones used are going to be the machine policy, retrieval cycle. This is for all packages and task sequences, and the application deployment eval cycle for apps. If you're using SCCM for Windows updates, they would be the software updates, deployment, and scan cycles. Under the client tools, you can change the cache size, clear the cache, look at client information, directly connect to the client log folder, which is really helpful if you don't have CM Trace on all your machines. You can rerun advertisements, run client checks, and you can show collections. This is huge. After a while, you get so many collections out there and you don't know what the computer is a part of what. And you can simply click on that, and it will bring up and show you all the collections that that device is a part of. So now you can say, okay, that makes sense. It's in the testing collection. That's why it's getting all this other software. Or, hey, it's not in a collection that it should be in to get the deployment that I want it to see. We also have repair client, uninstall SCCM client. If you're ever doing migrations between versions of SCCM, that can be very helpful. Console tools. You can do all these cool things right from a right click. AD security groups, connect to see $sign, group policy updates, interactive command prompt. I've had to use this before when trying to install software locally. I knew the executable was on the machine. I connected to it, CD'd into it, and fired off that install remotely. Computer management, open regedit, ping it, which is really cool. Let's say you want to deploy something to a large collection of computers. You can do this ping command on the entire collection and find out how many of them are actually on. If you put out a deployment and you see it's not going out, like, why isn't this installing? Well, most of your computers aren't on. Running processes, system information, wake on LAN, cancel pending restarts or shutdowns. Have you ever had a server that's going down and you don't want it to? You can quickly cancel that pending restart. You can schedule a restart or shutdown. On the opposite end, if you have a bunch of servers that need Windows updates and you want to schedule restarts on all of them, you can do it. And you can do the restart and shutdown. All these right-click tools are basically PowerShell commands. SCCM has a cool feature that allows you to either set user device affinity or let SCCM do it for you. So on the device itself, you can right-click and go to Edit Primary Users. And if the client settings are set up right, SCCM will make the association for you based on people being logged on for X amount of hours over X amount of days. You can also add a username manually. If you, say, get a brand new computer and you know a user is going to be assigned to it, you can get it assigned right there. The other thing goes backward the other way. If someone calls up and you only know the username, you can right-click on the username, edit primary devices, and it will show you the primary device that SCCM set, and you can also see that I set one manually, and it'll show you all the other devices that that user's been logged onto in the last 90 days. This is really cool when people call up and say, well, there's no way I could have been on that computer. Well, yes, it actually shows you were logged onto that computer 20 times over the last 90 days. So why would it be important to know whose primary devices is what? Well, nowadays SCCM has more of a user-centric focus. So instead of deploying to computers, you're deploying to users and user groups. And you can set a deployment to go out and say, deploy this to this collection, but only allow it to be installed if it's the primary user's device. This comes in very handy if you're deploying licensed software and such. User state migration. For those of you who haven't used it before, this can save you a ton of time when migrating users from old computers to new computers, or even an in-place upgrade on their existing machine to a new operating system. You can achieve this a couple ways. You can have one task sequence that captures the file settings, deploys the OS, and then restores the files and settings. Or in this scenario, I'm going to move someone from a Windows 7 machine to a Windows 10 machine. So I'm going to have a task sequence, which we talked about, that captures the files and settings from one computer. And then I'll have a restore task sequence that restores them on the other computer. To do this, we need to set up an association so SCCM knows what to do with what. So we're going to create a computer association. And don't you love it when you hover over and click the wrong thing? So I'm going to browse out here and grab the source computer, and it contains Win 7. And there it is, shows me as the last user, that's a good sign. The destination computer, and this one has Win 10 in it. I'm going to grab that one. It doesn't show a last user yet, so it hasn't been on long enough to show an association. And on user accounts, you can say capture and restore specified accounts, capture all user accounts and restore specified, or capture and restore all. For this instance, I'm going to go ahead and say all accounts just because I only am the one that's been on there, but in most of your environments, you're going to want to pick and choose the main user account or the few top users. So I'm going to hit OK on that, click back in the right spot, and now we have an association and it says not started. So I'm going to come over to my Windows 7 machine, and it doesn't quite grab all the screen here, but let's see. I have in my Software Center this capture files and settings, and this is that task sequence I showed you. And I'm going to say install. Even though this says install an operating system, that's not what it's doing. That's just because it's part of a task sequence. And on this machine, I added a printer, a couple things on the desktop, and a couple favorites just to make sure we can show that everything comes over. So while we're waiting for this, I want to show you where is this data being stored? Alright, don't you love technical problems? Good thing I have a pause button and I don't have to bore you guys in real life. So on your state migration point role, you tell SCCM where to store these files. So you can see there's a folder here, and I'm going to give myself permission. We can dig deeper into the migration status. And pretty soon you're going to see the files and settings popping in here. You can see the task sequence in action. You can set this so the end user sees it or so they don't see it. So if you want to start capturing their files behind the scenes without interrupting their work, you can still fire it off and they won't see a thing. And any of you that are familiar with SCCM are very familiar with the log files that go with everything. And if you're not, I'm going to show you what it looks like. So when this task sequence kicks off, it creates this folder called SMSTS log. And if you ran the CM trace live log file, you will be able to watch this in live action. It'll show you everything it's doing along the way, every command line. We can look at the scan state progress. Because I don't know about you, but I like to know that there's progress going on in my environment, because sometimes they just sit there and spin and you're really not sure if it's doing something. And I'll apologize for the choppiness. I'm using Office Mix to do these videos because I don't have time to make them all pretty and perfect as much as I'd like to, but I think you guys will appreciate that I'm just giving you content to refer back to. Alrighty, it finished the capture, and as I promised, we can look at that folder. Deep down here, it creates this big, long thing that, anyway, it has something to do with the profile. USMT, and then the migration file, and it shows the size of the file. Keep that in mind when you're doing a bunch of migrations. Some people have 40, 50 gig profiles, and that can really eat up your space pretty quick. The nice thing about the state migration point is it cleans up the data for you. So you set how many days out you want it to save the data before it blows it away. If you're just setting this up and playing for the first time, I recommend going out at least 7 to 14 days until you're sure you got everything set right. So let's bounce over to our Windows 10 machine. And I have the restore task sequence available. And let's go ahead and install that. You can see the task sequence doing the requesting the user state store, and pretty soon you'll see it putting things back. And you can do this live with the user logged on, it doesn't matter. And you can run this as many times as you want. So if you capture it, restore it, and you'd found they'd actually done some more work, you can just recapture and restore. Alright, it says it's finished, so I'm going to log off and log back on, and let's see what happened. So we're back after logon on my Windows 10 machine, and it brought over the document and the shortcut I had on my desktop, my favorites, and my beautiful background. So that's user state migration in a nutshell.